Well, I think I've told you guys a little bit about the various kinds of music that is in the Latino community, and I've been talking about Tex-Mex music the last time. You'll hear a little bit of a different version. This conjunto style of music, which is popular in the border states, began in northern Mexico and Texas in the mid-19th century when the German and Polish and Czech immigrants brought with them what's called a diatonic button accordion. Instead of the keys, it's the little buttons. And that accordion, along with some of the instruments that they used, produced this kind of sound. And until recently, the border was, as I mentioned, very fluid, back and forth. People lived in Mexico, came across and worked in the United States, in the state, and then went back at night and so on. And that helped the businesses on the American side, and it helped the people in the Mexican side. Well, that's kind of ended, as you all know. So today's piece is about this young woman, Texas woman called a Tejana in Spanish, and it alternates. The song itself alternates between Spanish and English. And here's the English version. John During, you got it on, pal?
Found me a little Tejanita, and I fell in love with her. She was so bonita that I had to marry her. Then she took off to Laredo, and she called me from Nuevo Leon. She said, send me some more money so I can come back home. Flaquito!
And that's how Kathleen Thomas's dad, former president of our Rotary Club in Nogales, Arizona, was as bilingual, and as Kathleen Thomas is bilingual. So, welcome, fellow Rotarians and guests. Meeting number 5,282. I hope that you all were able to appreciate that the inauguration of our new 46th president, and were as moved as I was with the words and the lyrics and the speeches. We have January birthdays. Charlie McCullum, he joined Rotary in 2015. He's a retired editor with the Mercury News. And coincidentally, Michael Turpin, or Mike Turpin, who joined Rotary in 2013, works with Bay Area News Group, which publishes the San Jose Mercury News, among other papers. And it's their birthday, so happy birthday, guys. Next, I am pleased to introduce a friend of mine, a somewhat near neighbor, a few blocks away, County Supervisor Susan Ellenberg. Born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She's a graduate of Barnard College and Columbia School of Law. She's a former member of the San Jose Unified School District Board of Trustees, and she joined our club in 2014. She's married to Steve Allenberg, whom we all know and admire. She was elected to District 4 of the county on 2019. So, Susan, I know you're with us, so take it away.
Come in. Thank you so much, Fernando, and I am well aware of what a stickler you are for the time, so I'm setting my own timer for 10 minutes today. And just want to start with a very quick observation of the picture that you've got up there. Clearly represents pre-COVID, and this is now about 10 months post last haircut. So there are reminders all around us. Thank you. Thank you again for inviting me here today. Though everything didn't magically change for the better on January 1st, there are so many hopeful signs in front of us, from a vaccine to economic recovery. From my perspective, it cannot happen fast enough. I'm going to share with you some updates today, first broad county-wide, and our COVID response, and then a couple of updates from my office. These past few weeks, as all of you know, we have seen continuing really high levels of COVID cases, including high volumes of hospitalized cases and increasing number of deaths. I have a lot of news to share regarding numbers, orders, and direction. For the most up-to-date data, You can find that on the county's COVID-19 website. Myra Flores, who's my communications director, is on today, and she will pop into the chat any links that I mention. So some dashboard numbers at a glance. Our county has seen 93,557 total COVID cases. There are currently 612 people hospitalized. To date, there have been, sadly, 1,076 deaths. We've conducted over 2 million tests. The current average test turnaround time is 1.7 days, which is way better than it was a month or so ago. And this week, 8.5% of the tests were positive. Of course, what everyone is talking about and very interested in right now is access to the vaccines. The number of vaccines that we have already administered, of course, changes daily. You can check to see how many vaccines have been delivered to the county and how many have been administered into arms, and when we're expecting our next shipments. While some providers haven't reported, the data we have shows that we've administered nearly 80% of the doses that we clearly have, that we have in the county as of this past Monday. Our county-run clinics have used more than 85% of their allocation. And overall, 80,588 residents received their first shots as of Monday. And of that group, just about 25,000, little under, have received their second dose. Our county providers are pushing to get the vaccine out as quickly as possible. The biggest barrier at the moment is the amount of supply, the number of vaccine doses that are coming into our county from federal and state resources. We'll pop the vaccine dashboard in the chat so you can take a look at that. I want to say that I absolutely recognize that communications about the vaccination efforts have been confusing, continue to change rapidly among federal, state, local, and individual healthcare providers. Every state, and in California, nearly every county is doing things differently, with some clearly slower rollouts than are acceptable. In our county, I do appreciate the push to ramp up and get doses out quickly, but clearly we still have gaps, communication challenges, and again, most importantly, a need for more supply. We have the personnel, we have the venues to scale this up as big as possible, given the number of vaccines that we get. And really getting more vaccines administered, especially to our most vulnerable residents, is critical to protecting all of our health, taking demand off of our hospitals, and getting our schools and businesses back open. A great deal of information on the status of the COVID vax effort in our county was also shared at the last Board of Supervisors meeting. I encourage you to watch the segment of the meeting or review the slides and continue to share any questions that you have with me and my team. Every 2 weeks at the board meeting, we get a pretty robust COVID update. Those obviously are public meetings. Please join whenever you can and hear all of the information firsthand. The county's website at sccfreevax.org is the official source for vaccine-related information in the county. It's regularly updated to reflect what segments of our community are currently eligible to receive the vaccine, as well as how to make appointments. And it is important to note that some health systems like Kaiser or PAMF may have variation in their rollout process as they open up slots to new groups of residents. They may move through their phases at a different pace than the county. Their numbers are just much, much smaller. Kaiser has scaled back their eligibility from 65 to 75, again, due to availability of the vaccine. One more piece of COVID information that I want to share with you is concern, of course, about the new SARS-CoV-2 virus variants that have been identified in the Bay Area and in our county specifically. Dr. Cody has said that, of course, more study is needed on this new variant. Analysis is currently underway in partnership with the CDC, but the news really, truly underscores the continued importance of the basics: hand washing, social distancing, masking protocols, all reduce the spread of the virus and any variant of the virus. And of course, acting as quickly and aggressively as we can to get more vaccines into the county and then out into the community. I'll shift a little bit now to share some news with you regarding the work in my district. And for those of you who may not know or remember, District 4 includes the cities of Campbell and Santa Clara, the unincorporated pockets of Burbank and Cambrian, and a whole bunch of neighborhoods in West San Jose. So let me start with a juvenile justice update. At the January 12th Board of Supervisors meeting, Supervisor Chavez and I requested our administration to come back to the board with recommendations on establishing a subcommittee of the Juvenile Justice Coordinating Council, of which I'm a member, with community members, people with lived experience, who can help us develop a plan for appropriate healing and rehabilitation for youth who will be leaving the state's division of juvenile justice after its closure by the governor later this year. This will help the county receive funding from the state to better serve kids that are coming back here. These are our kids from Santa Clara County. And we're very hopeful that we'll be able to serve a greater number of youths who have faced significant challenges and traumas in their lives with evidence-based practices so that they are not left behind in our community. We'll pop the link to the referral in the chat. Second, my colleagues on the Board of Supervisors approved my referral that asks our CEO to bring us a recommended budget that makes it transparent to the board and the public what programs and services he recommends the county spend money on in the next year. At a super basic level, a budget should show three things: how much the county is budgeting to spend on programs and services that we offer to the public, how much we're budgeting to spend on processes and operations that are needed to effectively deliver those programs and services, and how do we measure whether the money that we are spending is actually achieving the stated goals and services. I say basic because I believe it is, but currently our budget doesn't do that in a way that's easy to understand. And extreme transparency, I believe, is our responsibility because we ask our community for extreme trust. This past year, we have asked people literally to trust us with their livelihoods and their lives, and they, which includes every one of you, deserve to know exactly what we're doing with that trust. I've been doing a lot of work to advocate for small business supports. Supervisor Simidian and I had previously requested that the county invest funds in the California Rebuilding Fund that would be earmarked for our county small businesses that continue to be impacted by the pandemic and the public health orders. At the January 12th board meeting, we unanimously approved the first appropriation for $6 million, it's a big win for our small business community, which has been required to sacrifice so much for our health. At that meeting, I asked administration to report regularly to the board on the distribution of these funds. How much is loaned? How many people are taking advantage of this? Is the interest rate something that actually works for borrowers in our community? And be able to make good decisions about how and where to invest further. We need to know that this money is being used before we add more. And if there are barriers, we'll figure out where they are and find a better way to get money into the community. Again, a link to that program will magically pop up. Thank you, Myra, in the chat. Santa Clara County, as I hope all of you know, strives always to be a leader in equity and social justice and in the delivery of high quality, accessible healthcare to all of our residents. Despite strengths in each of these areas, absolutely more work is needed to assure that our values as a county are represented in the care of every patient in our hospital system. This will require an honest, an explicit, well, can I finish my sentence? An explicit recognition of the impact of race as a driver of health inequities. And for that, I'm looking for volunteers or involvement. If any of you have lived experience with any of our county hospitals, I would love for, and you would be interested in serving on this committee, please reach out to me, drop your name and your email in the chat. I would love to have you join this board. And if you ask me a question about it, I'll be happy to share more. Whew.
That wasn't me who rang that bell. That was somebody else. That wasn't me. The reason that we watch the time is because we have so many people on
I know.
agendas, and we have to kind of keep an eye on that. Otherwise, it throws off the entire presentation. But I think Columbia Law School prepared you very well, Susan. You were very thorough, you were very prepared, and This is one of the reasons why I instituted this program of introducing our city council and our county supervisors to us, so that we know your face, we hear your thoughts and can appreciate what you're doing. Thank you very much.
I'm delighted to have had the opportunity. And again, if there are questions from anyone, I know that the program today doesn't allow for time, pop them in the chat and I will be happy to get back to you. Thanks again, Fernando.
You bet. I'll be bringing by a history book on the club that was prepared here during the time that Karen Sinanu Towery was our president, and I'll be dropping off at your house. Okay, thank you very much. Now we introduce a new member, Ashley Anna Rose Puroy Bruni. She's with the downtown real estate developer Gary Dillabaugh, and Ashley does outreach for urban communities, I think. So in 3 minutes, Ashley, tell us about yourself and what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Fernando. Hello, fellow Rotary Club members. My name is Ashley Bruni, and I am truly honored to be the newest member of the San Jose Rotary Club. Born and raised in San Jose, there is no place that I love more than our very own Valley of Heart's Delight. These past few years, my career has led me to the revitalization of downtown San Jose in the real estate industry, where I am proud to be the newest member of the Urban Catalyst team, leading our community in the wonderful development of opportunity zones. It has been wonderful getting to know and build relationships with our amazing community, and I look forward to being a part of creating a cleaner, safer, and more vibrant downtown San Jose for all. Thank you, and I look forward to meeting you all in the very near future.
Well, that's pretty fast. Thank you very much. Welcome, and we look forward to meeting you in person as soon as that can happen. We want to thank your sponsors, Nicholas Adams and Josh Burrows, for bringing you to us, and you're bringing down our average age. Thank you very much, Ashley. Thank you. Next, we've got some Blue Badgers. Pat Tegens, and she was born in San Jose, by the way. She graduated from Leland High School, University of Washington. Then she spent 20 years in China, where she met her wife and learned to speak Mandarin. And also Ruina Tomaneng. Dr. Tomaneng was born in the Philippines. She's now president of San Jose City College. She joined our Rotary Club in January 2020. And I think we may have made 1 or 2 meetings before this COVID shutdown occurred. But we're really looking forward to meeting both of you when the time is right. We're hoping to do a hybrid presentation of our meetings from here on out to allow those who can't make the meetings physically can still join us via Zoom, and then hopefully we can have some opportunities to meet in person. So welcome, Blue Badgers. We'll give you your blue badges the next time you show up in person. Thank you. Let's see. We have the Fun and Friendship Committee. We have Brian Franklin. Brian, are you with us?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm here on behalf of the Fun and Friendship Committee, and just wanted to share several events that are coming up soon. They'll all be over the Zoom, so you can reach out and connect with your friends, the Rotary friends. The first is going to be January 28th. It'll start at 6:30, and it's going to be a songs and schmoozing with Jeremy Harris, who's hosting it. There's going to be a variety of name that tune type styles, and it's going to be levels for everyone. So if you're into music, then that's going to be one event to go to. The next one will be Share Your Pet. So that'll be hosted by Karen Fox, and it's going to be February 2nd at 7 p.m. So if you have any furry friends that reside with you, then definitely show up to that. They're going to keep it limited to make sure everybody gets some airtime to the first 10 people. So that, once again, is February 2nd. The last one we're going to be doing is on February 3rd at 6:30 p.m. And that's going to be a Rotary's 2021 trivia contest. And that's going to be hosted by Sean O'Kane. So it's going to cover an array of topics: arts, geography, history, and just a mixed bag of topics here. And there will be prizes at that one. So that's one not to be missed. And to build a little suspense here is there's Sean O'Kane, our host, is going to put together a 30-second promotion for the winner. And from what I gather, it is such high quality production, it's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So you definitely want to go to that one. They'll all be hosted via Zoom, and you're going to see these get blasted out to you. So look in the bulletin for that. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. Brian, by the way, is a financial advisor with Morgan Stanley. He was born in San Jose, went to Archbishop Mitty High School and San Jose State. So thank you very much. We look forward to that. Jeremy Harris says, don't worry about the music. It's not a contest. It'll be an opportunity to sing along and have fun with the popular songs that we will all know or we'll be given some words for. And the same thing with that trivia contest. It's not really a contest, it's an opportunity to show us how much you know out there. Okay, so the next one, thanks again, Brian. We've got Jenny Nicholas. She's a Chief Impact Officer at American Leadership Forum, and she's a member of the program committee. And she's got something for all of us. She put her heart into it. So tell us all about your Valentine's Day program there, Jenny.
Thank you, President Fernando. Hello, everybody. So as we have normally done for the last several years, we've had folks come and speak about love as a part of Valentine's Day, but all the love and all of its complexities and all of the things that make love interesting and wonderful and challenging and painful and all of it. This year, what we thought we would do is focus the talks on what you've learned about love during COVID-19 and during this pandemic, and really looking to find folks coming from different perspectives. So if you're a parent, a partner, someone who's single and living alone, a friend, a sibling, a community leader, somebody working on the front lines in essential service organizations. Always, we love stories about pets, whatever it may be. We would love to hear your 2 minutes. I want a huge shout out to Janica Clem, who's already stepped forward and volunteered, but I still need 9 other folks. And so please email me directly, jnicholas@alfsv.org. I will review everything that you write. I'll help you with it. I'll also time it to be sure it meets the 2-minute requirement, which I do every year, and be sure that that all works out. So please reach out to me. I think it would be actually a very inspiring and uplifting thing to hear about how we've all managed and learned even more about the amazing, wonderful thing called love during this crazy last 10 months. Thank you, President Fernando.
You bet, you bet. Love in the time of coronavirus disease kind of reminds me of love in the time of cholera. Marquez Garcia.
It does sound like that, actually, Fernando. I have that book right over here on my shelf.
Yeah, great, wonderful book. Well, it sounds exciting and give you a chance to evaluate what it is that keeps you together with your significant other.
That's
I've
right.
been at it for 56 years, and I'm still amazed that I love my wife as much as I did when I first met her. It's a pretty fun thing to be in love and to cherish each other. Yeah. Well, President's time, as they euphemistically put it. It's getting down to the wire, by the way. If you're planning to go to Taipei, you've got until February 15th to get in on what they call early registration discounts. After February 15th, you're on your own as to how much you have to pay and where you get to stay. Also, I'd like to say special thanks to our past president, Karen Sinanu-Towery, and the members of the meeting summaries committee. I don't know if you take time to read them. I know I didn't quite read them as assiduously as I probably should have before this COVID, but I do read them now. And these summaries are published in our Friday bulletins, and they really do summarize everything that's happened during this time of our meetings. And it kind of helps make it so that you can see the entire presentation rather than just piecemeal. I think they're terrific. I share them with our club, Alliance Club that we did with the Rotary Club of Mexico City. They send me their bulletin, and we send them ours. The one we get is all in Spanish, so I don't know how many of you are interested in receiving a copy. I'd be happy to send you what they send me, but let me know by email if you're interested. Many thanks to Kathleen Thomas, to Larry Stone, Dennis Fong for their very generous contributions to our club's foundation. Surely all the rest of you have news you want to share with us. So don't forget, our fine opportunities are usually on the last Wednesday of each month, but as you can see, we are very happy to make exceptions. So give Gay Crawford a contact and for any details. Now, if those of you who are interested in doing that, it's not a major deal, and you don't have to be as generous as Kathleen and Larry and Dennis were and have been. But whatever you give, it goes to fund our foundation, which in turn funds the work our committees do in the community. And that, I have to tell you, is mother's milk, because without your help, without your contributions, the good work that these folks do, it becomes more limited. It's not as expensive. So there is a statistic in our club, which is disappointing, and that is that not as many of you participate in these contributions as I would have imagined. But until I became president and I learned of it, I said, gee, that's something that needs to be addressed. So I'm hoping that over time, I'm going to invite the Club Foundation, Clarence Stone, Sarah Klisch, to come and talk to us more often than once a year to tell us what it is that the Rotary Foundation does, our Club Foundation, and the committee work that they do, so that you can become more aware of it, and by becoming more aware, become perhaps more supportive of what we're doing. Anyway, that's the idea behind it, and that's the whole reason for giving them increased visibility, so that you can feel that you understand that it's not a punishment, it's an opportunity to help the community that so desperately needs our help, particularly during these times of this COVID pandemic. Now, we've got Steve Ellenberg. You all know Steve. He was our program speaker chair for many years. He's still on the program. He's still helping us out. And today, he's a trial attorney with Hopkins and Carly. Today, he's going to be introducing our speakers. So, Steve, are you with us?
President Fernando, I believe this is David. I am doing the introduction, I believe.
All right. Well, I didn't get that message. Sorry.
No problem. No problem. So with this, I'll take it away. Okay, President?
Absolutely. Have at it.
All right. San Jose is in the process of searching for a new police chief and more broadly wrestling with how to provide public safety when so many nationally justifiably fear law enforcement. It is altogether fitting that our speaker today is St. Louis's recently retired Sergeant Heather Taylor. As you listen to Sergeant Taylor's presentation, I want you to keep in mind the following pieces of her bio. First, in 2012, she became the department's first Black woman to make detective supervisor as night watch homicide sergeant. She also worked some of the toughest assignments, such as sex crimes, child abuse, and undercover in an anti-crime unit. Second piece of information, while in high school, her brother murdered someone a block away from her home. Her mother turned him in and told him that he had to be held accountable. Tried as an adult, he got 25 years. A few years later, while Taylor was attending Southern Illinois University, her aunt was murdered by her boyfriend, an African-American and a St. Louis deputy marshal. He got 12 years and was out in 3. Most recently, she has served as the past president of the Ethical Society of Police, which represents primarily African-American police officers in St. Louis and was created in 1972 to support officers unwilling to go along with the good old boys that dominates their union. Just last year, the society issued a 60-page report calling for major reforms. Her pursuit of justice has earned her 12 national and local awards. It is why she has now retired to pursue a law degree. please welcome an extraordinary leader and role model, Sergeant Heather Taylor.
Hi, thank you. Wow, thank you for having me. It's always odd listening to someone tell your story. It's always odd to me. And I'm really pleased to be here today. And honestly, why you guys want me here is just kind of strange to me as well. So, well, like David said, I am a retired police officer. I was a sergeant in homicide since 2012. I was fortunate to have a group of some of the best detectives in the city of St. Louis. They were hardworking. They were no nonsense, sort of like me. And we were pretty much a family. And being African-American and the only African-American female at one point in the homicide section for years, most of my detectives were white males. And they're all men. So it was difficult at times because there are just barriers there. There are barriers. I don't know what it's like to be white. I know what it's like to be Black. I know what it's like to be a woman. I know what it's like to be in law enforcement. And some of those things, my points of view and where I came from were different from my detectives. But the one thing that we had in common was that we wanted justice for murder victims. And so we were united around that. And as time went on, my detectives and I became very close. Some of my fondest memories and people I will miss most are definitely my detectives in law enforcement. And, my career, I was blessed to have a long 20-year career where I was able to work in some of the most coveted assignments that you could want as an officer. Most officers come in, I want to be a detective. And I got to be a detective, but I got there from hard work and speaking up and being honest about a lot of things that were happening within our police department. And sometimes when you're being honest in law enforcement, you have to be prepared for the long-term battle that's going to come with that. Because law enforcement doesn't necessarily want to change. Most in law enforcement are male, most are white. The world is diverse, and you have people in communities, especially St. Louis City, that's a half and half population, 48% African American there. And you have to have people in those jobs that are capable of doing them. Number one, I'm not an advocate of someone getting a job because of their race or their gender. What I'm an advocate for is hiring qualified people and putting them in jobs so that they can do those jobs. And a lot of times it was very difficult for me to do my job in homicide because most of our victims, they were about 70% African American, 70 to maybe about 78% African American. And I am the lone, sometimes on a crew of 16 officers, I would be the only African American detective, and I'm a supervisor. So I have to supervise the scene. Every piece of evidence is a priority. What you see on CSI is nothing. It's nothing like what you're going to actually see on an actual homicide scene. Our homicide scenes would sometimes span several blocks, several different locations, and every piece of evidence was solely on my shoulders. I had to make sure everything was processed and delegate responsibilities. But at the same time, being an African American female and having a lot of the victims African American, they clung to me, and I didn't take that lightly. It was a privilege, to be a homicide detective and to investigate cases, to bring justice to families. And every time I worked, pretty much in the back of my mind was my mother, what she did. My brother was my only friend, actually. I was this 15-year-old kid whose best friend was their brother, a very quiet kid growing up. So my brother was it for me. And for my brother to do something like that, to take someone's life, was devastating. For me, it was devastating for my mother. But my mother knew that that victim had a family and that my brother had to be held accountable for that. And that's what she did. And so when I was on homicide scenes, that was always in the back of my mind that this victim has a mother. I don't care what their criminal history is. I don't care if they're black, white, whomever. My job is to bring them justice. And my detectives, through me, they understood that. And that's how they policed. And I loved them for it. I appreciated that. So my career in St. Louis City, even though I had to call out a lot of racism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, a lot of things I had to call out as a police association president. But at the same time, I would not change my 20 years in the St. Louis City Police Department. During that time, I met a lot of great people. There still are a lot of great people who want policing to improve, who want justice for people who are victimized in some of the most horrible ways you could ever imagine. And I'm grateful for that. But there are things that must change. And that's why, I had to leave. I left. My last day essentially was when I overheard a homicide detective say a victim's life didn't matter. And you can't do that. I complained on him. Nothing happened to him. And it was just, hey, it's time for me to move on into another field and to start thinking about my career after this career with helping people. And that's why, I left ultimately. But I don't know really like some of the interesting things. I worked in homicide, so probably for the average person, everything is exciting. But when you're in homicide, it's not what you see on TV. So it's always interesting when I meet people and I talk about it. But for me, I'm taking on this huge responsibility. And you're talking about murder, talking about families. There's a family behind every murder victim, no matter who that person was. So for me, it's not as interesting as the average citizen because I lived it. I've worked over 400 homicide scenes in my career. Even when I drive, I'm retired now in Florida. My husband took a job in Florida, so I'm there now. We're here. But when I'm in St. Louis and I'm driving, I'm always reminded of homicide scenes because where I drive, those were my homicide scenes throughout the city. There's a lot of violence. And for me, it's not something glorifying. Being the first African-American detective sergeant in homicide, that's not something that I pat myself on the back for. I think it's shameful because there are a lot of women who were qualified. There are a lot of African-American women as well who were qualified to be homicide detectives as well, sergeants there as well. But, when I'm always talking to someone else on the outside, it's always so exciting. And I look at it, or even my life, why it's not interesting to me because it's my life. So it's just, I'm living. So when I hear people, like my interview with NPR, when I hear people say, oh, that was just amazing. I'm like, to me, it's not amazing. It's just, these moments were revolved around a lot of tragedy for me and tragedy for the people that experience these things. It's not exciting having to call out an officer that you've worked with who's committed murder. That's not fun. It's not enjoyable. But if you're going to be a police association president, you have to praise your officers and you also have to criticize them. So for me, when I hear people say, wow, that's great what you do. That's so exciting. It's not exciting. It really just isn't exciting. It's very difficult to be in those shoes. And and the ways that it's affected me have been health-wise. When I first started this job, I played Division I basketball. I was very fit. Shoulder length hair. And as time went on, when I became a police association president, gained weight. So my goals right now, as I'm retired, are fitness. I have to lose weight. I have to get back to that point of enjoying life more and recognizing that I'm no longer a homicide sergeant. I'm no longer a police association president. I'm no longer in law enforcement. That life is now over, that I'm moving on to something new. And to really kind of, my goal in retirement is to get back to where I was, happiness, because I just always, I'm grateful, I'm happy with my husband and my family, of course, but I was always outside of that, very happy-go-lucky, in law enforcement, showed me just, even with having an aunt murdered, even with having a brother that murdered someone, law enforcement showed me that the world is really sometimes a very, very evil place. And to take those on in homicide and see someone murdered over a Nicki Minaj video, someone murdered literally over a hamburger, someone murdered over a parking space. I mean, I couldn't imagine, why would, to pull your gun out, to get so angry, to murder someone. Our society is very violent. And so is law enforcement. Some of the most horrific things that you've seen from citizens have been, I've seen some officers do some horrific things and had to report them as well. So it was a very difficult career. I wouldn't trade it for anything, but I'm ready for the next chapter, for just my own level of happiness and getting back to that level of happiness. And I feel like I'm talking forever right now, so.
You have a lot more time. We'll stop around whenever you want, but and you're free to take questions, but it's up to you really when you want to stop.
And Sergeant Taylor, if it's more comfortable, I'm happy to jump in. We can start asking you questions if that's an easier format for you, but you're welcome to continue with your presentation, whatever's more comfortable for you.
Yeah, questions are, I'm open to any questions. I'm
terrific.
I'm used to them.
All right, let me jump in here. People have been chatting me questions, so I'm going to start with our first one from Suzanne, which said, what are the qualities and values that we as a community should look for in a police chief, given the times and racial reckoning in our country?
When we have our current chief in John Hayden, St. Louis City, and because we were mostly African-American, people just automatically assumed that we wanted an African-American chief. But the reality is, with the law enforcement, you need to look at the number of lawsuits that have been filed against the chief or the person you're going to select. That is critical because you'll see a pattern of behavior. It's also important to look at the department that they're in, look at their body of work, and the oral interviews and the written tests they're excellent. However, background checks are critical. They are very critical. And a lot of people, because we had 370 members now in Ethical Society of Police, but we were 97% African-American. We were founded because of racism, or literally we were founded because of racism in 1972. And people were like, well, you want a Black chief? No. The race of your chief, if you choose an African-American chief who's not going to stand up for citizens and officers, I mean, it's a waste of time. If you choose a female chief who's not going to stand up for everyone, it's a waste of time. You're going to be right back into that pattern of, if they're not actually transparent, you're going to be right back into that environment that you don't want in law enforcement. So when you're choosing a chief, I think it's critical to do better background checks. Background check their lawsuits. The lawsuits are critical. Do they have a lot of discrimination lawsuits? Do they have a lot of lawsuits with officers using excessive use of force? So how are they leading? What are their goals when it comes to use of force? What are their goals when it comes to internal affairs complaints? Are they for civilian review boards? Civilian review boards are excellent. It gives these citizens an opportunity to chime into law enforcement. And if you're going to have a police department that's going to be separate from your community, you're really not helping yourself at all. So those are things that I think are important.
Okay, thank you very much. We've had a number of questions around this past summer. There was a lot of discussion around reallocating funds from the police to perhaps social services. Some have labeled the defund the police. What are your thoughts about that?
I'm not a fan of defund the police, and I don't use that term. I do believe, just in our police department, I think St. Louis City's budget is approximately 60% of the entire budget in the entire city. That's a lot of money for a place to have such high crime and to have a problem with retaining officers, in particular African-American officers. So if you're talking about reallocating some of those resources, you can't have 60% of your budget going to law enforcement. That's outrageous, especially if you're in a city that has issues with education, that has had decertified school systems, that doesn't have after school programs to occupy kids so that they don't get into trouble. So if you're going to reallocate resources, you're going to hire some social workers, excellent. There's a mental health program called Cahoots, and it's in, I want to say it's in Idaho. It may be in Idaho, or it may be in Portland, Oregon. I'm not really sure, but I have read about the program, and it's a success. So instead of sending officers on calls for mental health, you're going to send a social worker. You're going to send someone that has 4 years of training, that has 2 years of training, versus us as law enforcement officers I've had 40 hours of training in my entire career on mental health crisis and mental health intervention. And you're going to send me on a call. I'm good at it because I also studied psychology in college. So I've also had, 8 classes in psychology. So I understand it a little better, not a little, a lot better than your average officer would, but what about the officer that doesn't? So hiring social workers to help with juveniles, runaways, these are not police matters. There are things that simply should not be police matters, and they don't allow law enforcement officers who are bogged down answering calls for missings, which are not criminal. If it's a runaway, you can have a social worker work on that case until you believe that it is a case where there are actually a crime involved in it. Fire hydrant calls. These are not police matters. So when we talk about defund the police, if you're going to hire people who have a skill set that law enforcement doesn't have, that's what you need to do. Hire people that have a skill set that law enforcement doesn't have, because when you have a 13-year-old boy, like there was a young boy, I want to say out of Arizona, he had autism. And if you've ever dealt with a child that's on the spectrum or an adult that has autism, the communication is very different. And you have a law enforcement officer that shows up, this 13-year-old kid, he runs, he's shot in the back. So we need to have more resources there. So when you talk about reallocating, are you going to reallocate resources to hire more mental health social workers there? Are you going to reallocate resources for conflict resolution centers, which are excellent? So if there's a parking space dispute between neighbors, you don't send the police. Is it really a police matter? It really isn't. So are you going to a landlord-tenant dispute? Why are we involving law enforcement when it's a civil matter? Well, let's hire a crisis intervention team to go in, or crisis intervention centers where they handle disputes that are not criminal matters between neighbors so that they can resolve complaints between each other rather than involving law enforcement. So I'm not for defunding the police. I'm for reallocating some of the resources if it's necessary in that city. But some cities have a better grasp of what they're doing, unlike the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department.
Quick follow-up. There are a lot of questions which you just answered, which are very helpful, very informative. The follow-up question someone asked was, Arthur asked was, do you favor sending social workers and trained psychologists with police officers? Where there's mental health? Okay.
Oh, it's excellent. I've done it before. When I worked in juvenile, we had we had a social worker that would show up with me. And if it was a call, and sometimes children, they're afraid of law enforcement, especially in minority communities. There's this stigma with law enforcement. So when you have a social worker who's dressed in civilian clothes, they show up, it's excellent. I've literally had a call where I had to sit in the call with a young man who just got out the military. He had PTSD. And he and I were, when you're talking about polar opposites, we were the polar opposites. And he, you know, he had problems. He was adjusting to not being in the military. Mental illness was involved. And I sat with him for about an hour and 10 minutes until a social worker showed up, and we just talked and we talked and we talked. And the social worker got there and she stepped in and she did things that I wasn't capable of doing. And she was able to resolve some of the issues there and get him into, get more benefits for him through the Army. And he's actually doing well. You know, so that's why social workers are important. This is a young man that wanted to kill himself, and I'm talking to him and I don't have that skill set, but she did. And she talked to him, and now he's doing well, living out of Farmington, Missouri. So.
That's fabulous. Thank you. Larry Stone asks, how prevalent is the blue wall silence in the average police force, and what do you do to change it?
So it is very prevalent. I think it's very difficult to change it without the people at the very top being committed to change, and without your community being involved. The community has to be involved in law enforcement because we work for the people. It's not the other way around. And so there is this code of silence in law enforcement where I don't want to get another officer in trouble. I don't want him or her to be in trouble. But if you are working among people who are behaving like a monster, you have no choice but to. And otherwise, you are part of the problem. And that's something that I try to relay to officers all the time. You have to stand up. You have to, even if it's someone, I've had to turn in African-American officers. If an African-American officer is a monster, he or she has to go. And I've met African-American officers who were monsters. So you have to turn in, no matter who they are. You have to stand up because you really are. How are you going to sleep at night? You know, I don't get it.
Thanks. Hey, President Fernando asks if you could comment on the difference in security between the Black Lives Matter protests in Washington, D.C. and what happened on January 6th at our Capitol.
It was a stark difference. Yeah, obviously was. But what you have in law enforcement is that you have law enforcement, some of us that believe that militia, that believe that Proud Boys, who were designated by the Southern Poverty Law Center as a hate group, were pro-law enforcement. But the Anti-Defamation League, ADL, lists that in 2019, a lot of extremists committed a lot of hate crimes. And they also indicated that the group that was most likely to have a shootout with law enforcement were white supremacists. This is the ADL. We're not talking about some, unknown organization. This is the ADL. And they're telling law enforcement, they've repeatedly told us that there's a problem with white supremacy and infiltration into law enforcement and the military. But during the protesting, what we saw a lot of times were people waving Blue Lives Matter flags and Trump flags. They were synonymous at a lot of protests that were counter-protesting the Black Lives Matter. And a lot of times law enforcement felt a level of comfort with Trump, and no matter who I'm a Democrat, no matter who you are, you're still a law enforcement officer. No matter what side you're on, you're still a law enforcement officer. So the statistics say that you are more likely to be involved in a shootout with a militia group. If it's going to be a militia group or if it's going to be an extremist group, it's going to be a white supremacist group. Those are the ADL facts. And that's from 2009 until 2000, and I want to say 18. So we knew who the groups were. We knew that it was militia, We knew it was these extremist groups. We knew that it was also involved white supremacy, who were the greatest threat to law enforcement. And you had all of these instances where it was clearly stated that on January the 6th, there was going to be violence. I think most citizens that were looking at it with an honest eye, and you knew that, and most in law enforcement as well. But you had people that believed, because we had people at protests that were supporting law enforcement, waving Trump flags and waving Blue Lives Matter flags, that they were going to be pro-law enforcement. And I remember tweeting about it before it even happened. And knowing that there were going to be lives lost because law enforcement failed. There was an FBI report that said, hey, there is a problem with white supremacy and white nationalists infiltrating law enforcement and the military. That's a reality, whether we want to accept it or not. That's the reality. And what the responses were is that law enforcement appeasing these groups, these extremist groups, and it's not just white supremacists, it's these militia groups. Law enforcement has appeased them a lot of times because they've supported law enforcement against Black Lives Matter. So they built this rapport with some of them. Not all law enforcement felt this way about these militia groups and white supremacists, because I have friends who are white that can't stand white supremacy. They can't stand a lot of these things. I have Black friends that feel the same way, and Hispanic. So what you had law enforcement that had the people at the very top, the decision makers, that thought it would be okay. And then they lied and said they had no intelligence that indicated that you would have a group of insurrectionists storm the Capitol. And, it costs lives. It literally costs lives. Our inability in law enforcement to admit that there is a problem with officers who identify with these Proud Boys. Proud Boys are designated as a hate group. Southern Poverty Center designates them as a hate group. And law enforcement knew that. They marched. They literally marched on our Capitol in the greatest democracy. We're the greatest country in the world. They literally marched to storm the Capitol with intent to kill, with intent. We had militia groups, we had 3%ers, we had all these different extremist groups that were there with the intent to kill. With zip ties, they assaulted law enforcement. So the response was very different. I know from being in law enforcement, and I know from being an African American that I've seen it. There were more arrests during the George Floyd protesting in the first few days than there were in the day of the electoral college vote. Of course, it's one day versus others. But if you were to compare one day in George Floyd, those numbers are double. So the response was definitely different. And our biases in law enforcement sometimes become explicit biases. And those biases hurt us as well, because we fail to identify everyone as a potential threat. When I worked in law enforcement, everyone was a potential threat for me. I don't care who you are. If I got a call for someone that was armed, Black, white, male, female, Asian, I didn't care. I'm going to take that call seriously. And it's not one race over the other. It's the reality that anyone is capable of taking your life, especially in law enforcement.
Got another question. A number of people have asked questions about how we can diversify our law enforcement and how do we encourage young people, especially young folks from the BIPOC community, to join join law enforcement. What your suggestions might be.
So we have a recruitment program in St. Louis City, Ethical Society of Police. We pay for it ourselves. It's expensive, but we pay for it ourselves. And it is very diverse. So we've had like 100 people hired since 2016 that are all races. It's so popular that other police organizations send their potential hires to us, where we train them on explicit biases, implicit biases. We train them on public speaking. We train them on how you're supposed to dress for an interview. Things like that eliminate a lot of candidates for hire, especially minority candidates. We train them on public speaking, de-escalation. They attend our classes 2 times a week for 6 hours a week for 8 weeks. So during that 8 weeks, we get a face-to-face with them for 6 hours during the week, where we get to evaluate them, where we get to mentor them. And sometimes some of those people are not qualified to be officers. And when they're not, we try to get them into a job where they can be productive citizens no matter what. And so what happens during the program is that we see people and we're able to write recommendations for hire for them to become police officers.
You got 30 seconds.
Candidates.
30 seconds.
Okay, a lot of our candidates have been Hispanic. They've been mostly African-American, white, Bosnian. So that's what you can do. You can have programs like that.
Thank you so much. It's very interesting. It's fascinating to hear it from somebody on the inside to really let us know what you're thinking and what the thinking is of police officers as they are called upon to protect the interests of our society. Thank you for today's program. We've made a contribution on your behalf and on behalf of all our program speakers, to our city forest. It's a nonprofit which will be planting 46 shade trees in East San Jose, here in the area of San Jose, which is in need of such modifications to combat the heat islands and the climate change, and to provide habitat for the birds and wildlife in our neighborhoods. And so we want to do that and send you a thank you note. So be sure to leave us your mailing address where I can send you a personalized thank you note just to commemorate this talk today. I don't know if you're available to or willing to stay a few minutes more after our formal meeting ends at 1:15. Are you? Or do you have to leave?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Well,
yeah, I have another meeting.
Right. Okay, well, next week our speaker will be Tamara Alvarado, who will be speaking on advancing equity in philanthropy. She's a Stanford grad and former executive director of the Shortino Family Foundation. And now she's with the David and Lucille Packard Foundation local grant making program. They're going to give her $4 million a year for cultural and civic investments in 5 Bay Area counties. And she'll help advance creative, environmental, and civic organizations that connect people with art. So be sure you tune in next week. And to paraphrase my favorite immigrant governor, hasta la vista, Rotarians. This Zoom meeting stands adjourned. Thanks, everyone. And thank you, retired Sergeant Heather Taylor.
Welcome.
All right. Thanks, everyone.